What if I told you that one of the most important spiritual interviews ever recorded was never meant for you to see? It wasn't televised, it wasn't printed, it wasn't archived in any official hall of history. In fact, the moment it was transcribed, efforts were made to bury it, not because it was dangerous in a violent sense, but because it was dangerous in the way that truth always is to those who rely on control. The man who gave this interview wasn't a politician, a scientist, or a celebrity. He was something far more threatening to the established order. He was a mystic, a prophet, a conduit for knowledge that didn't come from textbooks but from the space between worlds. His name was Edgar Cayce, and the words he spoke in that room had the power to shatter the illusion you've lived in since the moment you were born. You may have heard whispers of him before, maybe as the sleeping prophet, maybe as the man who could heal with words or foresee world events while in a trance. But what you haven't heard, what most people were never allowed to hear, is the message that brought the most discomfort to those in power. Cayce didn't just see into your body or your future, he saw into your origin. And what he saw was never meant to be part of the official story. This interview, this suppressed conversation, was one of the few times Cayce spoke openly, without editing, without filtering, and without concern for how deeply it would challenge what people thought they knew about creation, divinity, and the soul. He didn't speak like a theologian or a preacher. He didn't demand belief. He simply opened the door and described what lay beyond. But it was enough to frighten those who made a business of fear, enough to make certain institutions scramble to ensure that the interview was quietly removed from circulation. If you're hearing this now, it's because cracks are finally forming in the wall they built to keep you from remembering who you are. Think about this for a moment. Why is it that the most radical voices of spiritual truth are always erased, misrepresented, or turned into caricatures? Why are mystics consistently reduced to madmen or myth? Why do governments, religious authorities, and even academic institutions all seem to share an unspoken agreement that direct spiritual knowledge, especially when it liberates people from fear, must be contained? It's because mystics speak in a language that doesn't need permission. They bypass the gatekeepers of culture and doctrine. They speak not to your logic, but to something older and deeper, the part of you that remembers. And when someone like Edgar Cayce taps into that well of memory, when he begins to describe realities that defy the sanitized explanations handed down to you, the systems built on your compliance begin to tremble. Edgar Cayce was not a man interested in fame or followers. He lived modestly. He spoke humbly. He often doubted his own gifts. But when he entered his trance state, when he left the waking mind behind and stepped into that luminous space beyond time, something else took over. Not a possession, but a deep alignment, as if his soul reached upward and a higher wisdom reached down. And in that meeting, truths were spoken. Sometimes they came in fragments, sometimes in parables, but always with a clarity that made you feel as though someone had just turned on a light you didn't know was missing. In this banned interview, Cayce didn't offer religious slogans or moral commandments. He spoke of origins, of where we come from, not as humans born of dust or sin, but as sparks of a divine creative force. He described a world before this world, a place not bound by gravity or flesh, where we existed as pure consciousness, vibrating with purpose. He said we weren't born into punishment, we weren't cast out. We chose to explore. We descended into matter not as a fall, but as a journey, a sacred forgetting. And now, in this lifetime, we are remembering. That idea alone was enough to disturb centuries of dogma. Because if you were not born broken, if you were not a sinner in need of saving, if you were not a random accident in a cold universe, then what were you? Cayce answered, you were a creator. You were a fragment of source. You were meant to evolve, not obey. This is what they didn't want spreading. Not because it was false, but because it was true in a way that made their systems irrelevant. Imagine billions of people realizing that the authority they'd outsourced to churches, governments, and even science had always existed within them. Imagine what would happen if masses of individuals stopped fearing death, stopped begging for approval, stopped looking outward for meaning and started turning inward. The machinery of control would grind to a halt. That's why mystics are silenced. It's not their eccentricity that scares people, it's their clarity. The ability to speak about soul, creation, purpose, and energy with such certainty that it makes everything else seem like noise. Casey had that clarity. He didn't seek to start a religion. He didn't want worship. He just wanted you to remember. Remember what you were before the programming, before the fear, before you were told who you were allowed to be. He described the soul as eternal, not just in duration, but in purpose. He explained that life wasn't a test with heaven or hell at the end. It was a classroom, a mirror, a sacred unfolding, and more than that, he said you were never alone in it. That higher beings, what he called helpers, guides, or angels, were always present, nudging, guiding, whispering, not to control you, but to remind you of the assignment you gave yourself before entering this life. These weren't vague metaphors to Casey. He spoke as if he had been there, as if he remembered, as if the veils that keep most people in amnesia had briefly lifted for him, and what he saw was so beautiful, so purposeful, so divinely orchestrated, that it would change everything you believe about who you are. That's why they buried this interview, because it didn't just describe an alternative idea. It dismantled the entire structure. It exposed the illusion that you are small, separate, and broken. It made clear that you were designed, crafted by something so vast and loving that even now, in this moment, you are held by it. That even your pain has meaning. Even your confusion is part of the path back to remembrance. They erased the recording. The notes were destroyed. The interviewer was silenced. But truth doesn't die that easily. It lingers. It waits. It finds new voices, new platforms, new cracks in the walls of censorship. And now it's reaching you. Because somewhere deep inside you already know what Casey knew. You've felt it in quiet moments, in dreams, in synchronicities too perfect to be random, in the stillness of meditation or the chaos of heartbreak. That sense that something, some higher intelligence is moving with you, within you, guiding you. That is not fantasy. That is your origin calling you home. Edgar Casey wasn't just a prophet. He was a vessel, a mirror. And now that his voice has returned through this message, the only question that remains is this: will you remember what you were before the world told you to forget? From the moment you took your first breath, the world began feeding you a story about where you came from, what you are, and why you exist. It came packaged in different forms: school books, sermons, science classes, television, but the core message remained the same. Your origin was either an accident or a punishment. You were told that life sparked out of chaos, that the universe had no intention behind it, that your existence was a result of chemicals bumping into each other in just the right way, and somehow over billions of years consciousness just appeared. Or, if you didn't follow the scientific narrative, you were handed another story, one where your birth wasn't random, but it was stained, a fall from grace through emotion, from a mistake, a sin passed down to you before you even had a chance to speak your own name. So either you are a cosmic coincidence or a fallen creature crawling toward redemption. Either way, you're left with the same conclusion: you're flawed, you're powerless, you're at the mercy of forces far greater than yourself, and the best you can hope for is to obey the rules, trust the system, and try to make peace with your insignificance. But what if the story is wrong? What if your origin isn't accidental or shameful, but intentional? What if your existence is not a byproduct of chaos or a consequence of sin, but the result of something higher, something conscious, creative, and infinitely intelligent? You weren't supposed to ask that question. You were trained to accept the official narratives without hesitation. After all, they came with credentials, with sacred texts and peer-reviewed studies. They were reinforced by authority figures in every direction. But if you look closely, if you dare to peel back the layers, you'll start to see the fingerprints of something else. Something hiding in plain sight. The idea that you are a mistake serves a purpose. It keeps you small, it keeps you obedient, and it benefits the very structures that claim to protect you. Religious institutions built empires on the foundation of original sin. They told you that you were born broken, and only they held the keys to your salvation. That without their rituals, their rules, their intermediaries, you were doomed. And people believed it. For centuries, masses bowed their heads in shame, afraid of the wrath of a creator who supposedly made them, judged them, and punished them for being exactly what he made. Meanwhile, scientific institutions offered a different flavor of disempowerment. No hellfire, no judgment, just meaninglessness. You're a machine, they said. Your mind is a byproduct of your brain. Your feelings are chemical fluctuations. Your dreams are irrelevant. And when you die, it all shuts off. Lights out. Game over. The end. If religion used guilt to control, science used emptiness. Two sides of the same coin. And the result? Billions of people walking through life with a quiet ache in their chest. An invisible weight, a gnawing sense that something's missing, but they can't quite name it. Because when you're taught that your existence is either a cosmic fluke or a moral failure, how could you ever feel whole? But here's the truth that was buried beneath both dogma and data. You were not made to suffer. You were not born into error. You are not a mistake. You were created deliberately, lovingly, and with purpose, not by some distant angry God who demands worship, not by blind particles colliding in the void, but by a higher intelligence, one so vast and so subtle that it doesn't need temples or telescopes to be known. It reveals itself in the silence between your thoughts, in the awe you feel when you look up at the stars, in the way your breath moves without effort, in the moments of stillness when you remember even for a second that you are more than this body, more than this name, more than this role you've been playing. This higher intelligence, this source, is not separate from you. It didn't just create you, it is you, expressed in a unique, unrepeatable form. You are not an object it produced, you are a spark of it, a manifestation, a wave returning to the ocean that birthed it, and everything about you, your curiosity, your creativity, your longing for truth, is evidence of that connection. But that truth is dangerous, not to you, not to your soul, but to the systems that feed on your disempowerment. If you knew, really knew, that you were created by a higher intelligence not to serve but to evolve, not to worship but to awaken, not to fear but to remember, you would become untouchable. You wouldn't need to be saved. You wouldn't need to numb yourself with consumption or distraction. You wouldn't cling to leaders or ideologies. You'd become sovereign, and a sovereign population cannot be controlled. That's why the real story of your origin was hidden, because if you realized you were designed by intelligence, not coincidence, you might start trusting your inner wisdom over external authority. You might stop chasing approval and start listening to the quiet voice within you. You might wake up from the dream of separation and see that everything, the pain, the beauty, the mystery, is part of the same divine tapestry. They don't want that. They want you afraid. They want you confused. They want you debating evolution versus creationism while ignoring the deeper question entirely. What if we were created deliberately, not by chance or punishment, but by design? Not just you, all of us. As part of something so vast, it can't be captured in scripture or reduced to equations. A living intelligence that breathes through every tree, every planet, every heartbeat. And that intelligence didn't just put you here to suffer or strive. It put you here to remember what you are. A creator, a witness, a soul on a journey back to wholeness. You don't need to believe in myths or abandon science to feel this truth. You just need to pay attention to the synchronicities that defy logic, to the dreams that feel more real than waking life, to the way your body responds when you hear something that resonates in your bones. That's not coincidence, that's contact. You are in constant dialogue with the source that created you. You just forgot the language. But even now, it's starting to return. The world around you will keep trying to distract you. Endless headlines, endless fear, endless noise. But somewhere inside, something is stirring. A remembering, a call. And when you follow that call, when you begin to peel away the false narratives that were handed to you, you'll find something ancient and alive waiting underneath. You were never a mistake. You were never a sinner. You were never a machine. You were created. And now, you're being invited to remember why. What if the essence of who you are didn't begin in the womb? What if your first moment wasn't your first breath, or your first thought, or even the spark of consciousness inside a growing fetus? What if you existed long before the body, long before the name, long before the world ever called you human? This isn't just a philosophical question, it's the unraveling of everything you've been taught to believe about identity, creation, and purpose. You see, there's a truth buried so deep that most people spend lifetimes circling around it without ever touching it. A truth that suggests you weren't created in error, nor were you placed here to be judged or punished. Instead, you were designed consciously, intelligently, and with an astonishing degree of love, not by accident, not by a cold universe, but by something benevolent, something higher. And not just higher in hierarchy, but in vibration, awareness, intelligence, a force that exists beyond form, beyond the limitations of time, beyond fear, division, and death. It is not a god with a beard, it is not a judge on a throne. It is something for which there is no name that fits, but for the sake of language we call it Source, or Spirit, or the One, and this is what gave birth to your soul. According to the information once spoken through trance, not from the analytical mind, but from a space of pure alignment with spiritual truth, the soul was never a product of physical evolution. It didn't crawl out of the ocean. It didn't rise through biology. The soul came first. It was born in the image of something ineffable, not in physical form, but in spiritual resonance. It was patterned after a vibration, not a flesh and blood structure. You weren't created to obey, you were created to evolve. Long before Earth was formed, long before matter had shape, the essence of you already existed as part of a divine collective. Not a crowd, not a herd, but a field of consciousness so brilliant that the very idea of separation hadn't yet taken hold. This realm, what some would later call the spiritual dimension, was not a place in the way you think of places. It was a state, a frequency, a field of living intelligence where souls, newly formed, danced in harmony with the source that birthed them. There was no fear, because there was no division, no pain, because there was no resistance. There was only creation, learning, expansion. And then came the decision. Not a fall, not a punishment, but a choice. The choice to descend into form, to take on individuality, to explore limitation, not because you were banished, but because the soul longed to experience contrast, and through that contrast, greater awareness, to move through dimensions, to play in the fields of time and space, to know love by walking through separation, and to remember unity by returning to it, consciously, with wisdom. This is where the idea of the divine pattern comes in. You were not created at random. Your soul was imprinted with a design, not a blueprint for conformity, but a pattern of infinite potential, encoded with memory, resonance, and purpose. This divine pattern was your original frequency, the unique note you were meant to sound in the cosmic symphony. And just like a seed contains the entire tree within it, your soul carried the imprint of this divine design from the very beginning. But here's the part they never told you. As you entered physicality, as your soul chose to inhabit matter, you began to forget. Layer by layer, The memory of your true nature dimmed. The body became the focus. The world became the teacher. And the ego, your sense of being a separate, isolated self, was born out of necessity. It served a purpose. But over time it became a prison, and the divine pattern, it was buried beneath the noise of survival, competition, fear. Still, it never left you. That's the beauty of it. No matter how lost you feel, no matter how many lifetimes you've wandered, that original imprint remains intact, untouched by trauma, untarnished by shame, beyond the reach of any system that tried to own you. It's there in the silence behind your thoughts. It's there in the hunger you feel for something more, even when you can't name it. It's there in your dreams, in your intuition, in the moments you feel a sudden knowing without any logical explanation. That's not imagination, that's memory. You weren't created to suffer. That idea was injected into the collective mind to keep you disconnected. You were created to grow, to unfold, to evolve. The journey of the soul through physical form is not a punishment but a process, and every experience, no matter how painful or disorienting, is part of your soul's curriculum. You didn't come here to be tested by some external god. You came here to test yourself, to remember, through trial and beauty and loss, that you are not the form you wear, but the light within it. The force that created you never abandoned you. It did not demand worship, it did not write a rule book, it simply extended itself into form, through you, through everyone, through every blade of grass and gust of wind. You are not just connected to this source, you are made of it. There is no separation. Only the illusion of separation, crafted by the mind, reinforced by culture, weaponized by systems that depend on your disempowerment. And even now, that illusion is cracking. You feel it, don't you? That quiet inner tremor that says, there's more. That subtle rebellion against everything you've been told about what you are. That voice that refuses to accept that you're here just to pay bills, follow rules, and hope for a peaceful ending. That's not madness. That's the original signal trying to break through. You are not a flesh robot, animated by chance. You are not a fallen angel clawing your way back into grace. You are a soul, born of a loving intelligence, wrapped in a divine pattern that remembers exactly where you came from and where you're going. And that pattern isn't rigid, it's not a script. It's a resonance, a pathway of possibility that becomes clearer the more you tune into it, the more you trust the inner compass over the outer noise, the more you shed the programs and listen to the stillness that has always been speaking to you beneath the fear. You were created, yes, but not just to exist. You were created to become, to unfold the divine pattern like a flower opening to the sun. And the force that designed you, it's not separate. It's in your breath. It's in your tears. It's in the space between your thoughts and the pull in your chest when you hear truth. You don't have to find it. You only have to remember that it never left. Before you had a name, before your feet ever touched the ground, before there was even a planet to be born onto, you existed. Not in the way the world now defines existence, with breath, bone, or brain, but as something far more luminous. You were a spark of awareness, born from a field of pure intelligence and light. You didn't look like anything. You didn't think in words. You were, and that was enough. In that beginning state, you moved in rhythm with a greater presence. There was no distance between you and what many now call God. Not a father figure, not a judge, but a living ocean of consciousness that birthed you out of itself. You were an extension of it, not separate, not less than. Imagine a wave rising on the sea. Individual, yes, but never disconnected. That was you. That still is you, though you've forgotten. In this original state you had no need for form. There was no matter to bind you, no limits to your expression. Thought and creation were one and the same. To imagine something was to become it, to experience it, to know it fully. You could explore vast dimensions of light, color, vibration, and frequency without ever having to go anywhere, because you were everywhere. You had no gender, no culture, no fear. You were freedom itself. And yet, something stirred. Not dissatisfaction, not rebellion, but curiosity. A question arose within the collective soul. What would it be like to experience contrast? What would it mean to explore separation, to forget the all-knowingness, and through experience remember again? What if light could know itself by walking through the dark? This was the beginning of what some have called the descent. Not a fall in the moral sense, not a punishment, but a movement, a turning inward, a gradual densification of vibration. Souls, once radiant and free, began to focus their attention on denser planes of existence. They moved into dimensions where duality existed, where light had shadow, where choice had consequence, where love could be withheld or given freely, and so began the soul's journey into matter. At first it was gentle. Thought still shaped reality with ease. Beings could shift form, move through energy, remain aware of their origin, even while exploring these new frontiers. But as focus deepened, layer upon layer, lifetime upon lifetime, the memory of the source began to fade. The more the soul engaged with physicality, the more it identified with the form it occupied. A body here, a role there, gender, tribe, status. The soul, still divine, began to believe in its separateness, and the belief itself created new layers of experience: fear, competition, grief. And yet, even these were not mistakes. They were part of the great experiment, part of the curriculum of remembering. You see, the descent into matter was never meant to be permanent. It was never meant to imprison you. It was meant to teach you. Through limitation you would come to value freedom. Through pain you would understand compassion. Through forgetting you would ignite the desire to remember. But over time something changed. What began as exploration became entrapment. The soul didn't just experience form. It became identified with it. It forgot that it was the light behind the eyes, not the eyes themselves. It forgot that it was the dreamer, not the dream. And with that forgetting came fear. Fear that it was alone. Fear that it was unloved. Fear that its existence was accidental, or worse, flawed. This forgetting, this losing sight of source, is the true meaning of the fall. Not a moral failure, not a sin, but a blindness. Like walking into a room and forgetting why you came. Like hearing a song you once loved but no longer recognizing the melody. The divine presence was never gone, it couldn't be. It is you, but your awareness of it faded, not because it left, but because your focus shifted. And still this too was part of the plan, because only through the illusion of separation could you learn what unity really means. Only by wandering far from home could you realize how deeply you belonged there all along. This is not about shame, it's about becoming. The soul didn't fall into matter as punishment. It chose it. It chose challenge. It chose limitation. It chose to forget, just so it could remember again with deeper wisdom, deeper love. You are not here by accident. You are not trapped in a body against your will. You are not being tested by some external force. You are here because you decided that the lessons this dimension could offer were worth the risk of forgetting. You were right. Because now you are beginning to wake up. You're starting to see through the veil. You're beginning to question the story you've been fed. You feel the pull not back to old beliefs but forward, into something ancient and new at once. A remembering that lives not in your mind but in your bones, in your dreams, in the space between your thoughts. Losing sight of source was never the end. It was just a chapter. And now you are turning the page. Every moment of awakening, every flash of insight, every time you feel that quiet knowing deep inside you, it's the echo of what you once were, and what you still are. The light has never left. It simply waited for you to look in its direction again. You're not broken. You're becoming. You're not lost. You're unfolding. And the source that you once knew so intimately, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's closer than your breath. It's the still point inside you, waiting not to be found, but to be felt. This journey into matter was never a curse, it was a pilgrimage. And now your soul is remembering the way back. Not up, not out, but through. There's a reason this knowledge isn't taught in your schools, a reason you weren't told as a child that you came from light, not sin, a reason you had to stumble your way through confusion, shame, and self-doubt before you even had a chance to ask the deeper questions. It's not that the truth isn't available, it's that the systems around you have been carefully designed to keep you from ever looking for it. Because once you know who you really are, you become something the world is not built to handle. Free. From the moment you could comprehend language, they began telling you a story, not one of beauty but of brokenness. You were told you were born unworthy, that your desires were dangerous, your thoughts sinful, your instincts flawed. You were told you needed to be saved from yourself, from your nature, from a wrathful power watching you from above. And the only way to be saved, they said, was through obedience, through surrender to an institution, a doctrine, a hierarchy. They told you what to believe, they told you how to behave, and they promised you peace, but only after death, if you followed the rules. At the core of all this was a single idea: you are not enough. Not as you are, not without them, not without someone else to approve, forgive, or redeem you. That idea, so simple, so subtle, is the seed from which all control grows. Because once you believe that you're broken, you'll spend your life trying to fix yourself. Once you believe that your essence is sinful, you'll hand over your power in hopes of becoming pure. And once you believe that your worth depends on an external authority, you'll never stop seeking its approval. This is not spiritual guidance, it's spiritual warfare. The disconnection from source is not an accident. It's a strategy, because a person who remembers they are divine cannot be controlled. A person who knows they were never broken will not beg to be fixed. And a person who trusts their own soul will no longer follow blindly. Fear is the most effective tool of control ever devised. Fear turns questioning into rebellion. It turns exploration into heresy. It turns love into guilt. And the most potent form of fear is the one wrapped in righteousness, the kind that tells you suffering is holy, that joy is dangerous, that your own inner voice is the enemy. That is how people are kept small, not with chains, but with shame. You were taught to fear your own power, to fear your body, to fear your mind, to fear death, but above all, to fear disobedience, because disobedience meant exile, not just from society, but from salvation itself. And so you obeyed. You bowed your head, you suppressed your intuition, you silenced your knowing, you learned to play the role. Meanwhile, the institutions that spread these messages, religious, political, educational, grew fat on your fear. They built kingdoms on your submission. They created entire empires by convincing you that you were nothing unless they said otherwise. And when someone came along to say, "You are already whole," they were silenced, branded as dangerous, exiled, killed, or worse, turned into symbols that could be manipulated, sanitized, and repurposed. Make no mistake, this has always been about power. Not divine power, but earthly power. The kind that thrives on hierarchy, the kind that needs followers to survive, because without your allegiance, without your belief in your own inadequacy, the entire structure crumbles. You were never meant to be a worshipper, you were meant to be a creator. But creators don't kneel, creators don't beg, and that makes you dangerous. This is why the truth has been hidden, not because it's too complex, but because it's too liberating. You see, when you reconnect to Source, when you remember that you are a soul born of intelligence and love, you no longer fit into the molds they've created for you. You stop playing small. You stop accepting suffering as normal. You stop trading your time and energy for approval. You begin to question not just the story you were given, but the very world built on that story. You begin to feel something awaken inside of you, something ancient, a knowing, Not the kind that comes from books or teachers, but the kind that lives in your bones, the kind that whispers, "You were never lost, you were only asleep." And once that voice gets louder, once that spark becomes a flame, you become sovereign. Spiritual sovereignty is the single greatest threat to any system of control. Because a sovereign being does not need permission to be free. A sovereign being does not outsource their truth. They don't look outside for validation. They don't live in fear of punishment because they know that love does not punish. They don't trade their intuition for doctrine. They don't confuse obedience with virtue. They are guided from within, and that guidance cannot be corrupted. This is the power they fear. Not violence, not rebellion, but remembrance. Because once you remember who you are, you stop feeding the systems that rely on your amnesia. You stop giving your energy to institutions that profit from your suffering. You stop consuming the distractions designed to keep you numb. You see through the noise. You begin to create your own path, your own rituals, your own relationship with the divine, and you do it not with anger, but with clarity. You do it not because you hate what was, but because you're ready for what's next. They cannot sell you salvation once you realize you were never condemned. They cannot sell you worthiness once you remember you were born with it. They cannot control your thoughts once you trust your own knowing. This is why mystics were burned. This is why visionaries were discredited. This is why prophets were killed, not because they were wrong, but because they dared to say, "You are already enough. You don't need us to be whole. The kingdom of heaven is within you." These words shake the foundation of every structure built on fear. So they buried them, they twisted them, they built new stories to cover the old ones, and still the truth survived, hidden in symbols, in dreams, in whispers, waiting for you, because truth doesn't die, it waits. And now, in this moment, it's reaching for you again, not to pull you into rebellion, but to remind you that you were never bound, you are not broken, you are not fallen, you are not in need of fixing, you are remembering. And that remembrance is what every system fears the most. Before the world taught you who to be, before the noise of culture, survival, and shame shaped your identity, there was something pure imprinted in you, not a doctrine, not a belief, a design, a living, breathing pattern of intelligence, a blueprint that carried within it the full memory of what you are and why you came here. It wasn't written in words or symbols. It was encoded in your energy, your frequency, your very being. You didn't learn it, you are it. This original blueprint wasn't static or mechanical. It wasn't a rigid plan laid out step by step. It was more like a song, a vibration. One you could either align with or drift away from, depending on how you lived, what you chose, and what you remembered. At the core of this design was one truth. You are not just physical. You never were. You are multidimensional. The body you see in the mirror is only one layer, one expression of a much deeper essence. Beneath the skin, beneath the nervous system and organs, there exists something subtler, something more enduring. This is the etheric body, not a fantasy, not a metaphor, but a real energetic structure that holds the template of who you were meant to be. It's the bridge between your soul and your physical form, the silent conductor behind your thoughts, your intuition, your health, your magnetic pull to people and experiences. Long before science had the tools to measure anything beyond matter, ancient traditions were already speaking of it, calling it prana, chi, subtle energy, the vital body, all of it pointing to the same truth. You are made of more than what you can see. And in this etheric body lives the memory of your original vibration. That vibration was not chaos, it was harmony. Not perfection in the way humans define it, but balance, resonance, clarity. When you were first formed in the spiritual realms, your soul was in total alignment with the source that created it. There was no dissonance, no fragmentation. You were a symphony in motion designed not to obey but to create. Your very existence was an act of expression. You didn't learn to love, you were love in movement. You didn't need to chase worth, you radiated it. And the purpose of your soul wasn't to pass tests or prove anything, it was to evolve, to expand through experience, to bring new colors into the spectrum of creation. This is the divine design. Humanity wasn't an accident. It was an extension of spirit into form, a sacred experiment in free will, emotion, creativity and growth. Souls, drawn to the richness of physical experience, took form on earth not because they had fallen, but because they were curious, because there is something about limitation that sharpens awareness, something about being bound by time and space that makes each moment more vivid, more precious. The blueprint held all of it, your gifts, your tendencies, your potential timelines, but the path, that was yours to shape. And then it began to fracture, not all at once, not with a single cataclysm, but slowly as the soul immersed itself deeper into matter, into identification with the body, with culture, with fear. The etheric body remained intact, but the connection to it, the awareness of it, began to dim, like fog rolling in over a crystal-clear lake. The truth was still there, just hidden from view. The more the world shouted at you to conform, to survive, to compete, the more you forgot the vibration you were meant to live in, and yet, even in the forgetting, the blueprint remained. It has never been destroyed, only distorted. Imagine a symphony that's gone slightly out of tune. The instruments are still there, the music is still written, but the notes no longer land the way they once did. The distortion isn't evil, it's the result of accumulated choices, misalignments, inherited beliefs. And each misalignment builds a kind of static in your field. Over time, that static becomes the norm. You begin to believe that chaos is reality, that disharmony is truth, that your anxiety, your disconnection, your confusion are just how life is. But that's not life, that's forgetting. Because when you strip all of it away, the trauma, the programming, the false identities, you begin to feel it again. The pulse beneath the noise, the vibration you came here to express. Sometimes it comes in dreams, sometimes in moments of stillness, sometimes in the way your heart leaps when you hear something that feels like truth. That's not imagination, that's memory. That's the etheric body resonating with its original frequency. And the more you listen to it, the more it begins to recalibrate. You start remembering that you are not here to earn love, you are love. You start seeing that you are not your pain, you are the one witnessing it. You begin to realize that your intuition isn't a guess, it's guidance, that your creativity isn't frivolous, it's sacred, that your desire to grow, to heal, to connect, to awaken, that is the design coming back online. The blueprint was always about creation. You weren't built to follow someone else's map. You were built to build. To take the raw material of experience and turn it into wisdom. To take pain and turn it into compassion. To take beauty and magnify it. To live with so much presence that even the ordinary becomes holy. You are not a copy of someone else's image. You are a unique frequency, a distinct note in the symphony of consciousness. And when you align with your own design, you don't just heal. You radiate. You become a mirror for others. You remind them, not with words, but with presence, of what they've forgotten in themselves. That's why this knowledge has been kept out of reach. Because a person who knows they are divine, creative, multidimensional, and sovereign cannot be manipulated. They cannot be sold a false identity. They cannot be scared into submission. They remember their blueprint, and in that remembering they become powerful, not in domination, but in clarity. They no longer chase meaning, they embody. The etheric body is your map back to that state. It holds the pattern, the song, the alignment. And as you reconnect with it, through breath, through awareness, through intention, you begin to undo the distortions, not by force, but by resonance. Healing isn't about fixing what's wrong, it's about returning to what's true. You don't need to become someone new. You only need to become who you already are beneath the layer. The blueprint is waiting. It always has been. Even now, it hums beneath your heartbeat. Even now, it calls you back, not to the past, but to the path you came to walk before the world convinced you to forget. You were not made to survive. You were made to shine. And no distortion, no programming, no lifetime of forgetting can erase what was written into the very core of your being. You are a soul in a body, yes. But you are also a body in a soul, and that soul remembers. Long before our current history began, before the empires you've read about in textbooks, before the known rise and fall of kings and nations, there existed a civilization that walked much closer to the divine pattern, a time when human beings remembered what they were, not as a myth, not as a legend, but as a reality etched into the ether of this planet. They called it Atlantis. Not the fantasy of sunken temples and magic crystals, but a society where spiritual knowledge and advanced understanding were united. A place where humanity still carried the memory of its divine origin and lived in resonance with that memory. The people of this time were not bound by the same limitations you've grown used to. Their science was not separate from their spirit. Their technology did not oppose the earth. Their minds were not divided against their hearts. They understood something we've forgotten, that creation is sacred and power is a responsibility, not a right. This alignment didn't make them perfect. It made them powerful, and that power, as always, came with choice. According to the visions received in deep trance, Atlantis was not born in ignorance. It was a continuation of a lineage, a phase in the great cycle of the soul's descent into matter. The Atlanteans were not the first humans, but they were among the last to live with full awareness of their multidimensional nature. They understood the etheric body, the field of energy that surrounds all life. They knew how to work with vibration, not just machine. They could heal with frequency, communicate across distances without devices, harness energy from the earth itself without destruction. But knowledge is a mirror. It reflects what's within you. In the hands of a clear soul, it becomes a tool for harmony. In the hands of a fragmented one, it becomes a weapon. And over time, fractures appeared, not in the land, but in consciousness. The ego, once a servant of the soul, began to crave more control, more power, more identity. A split formed between those who still honored the divine blueprint and those who sought to bend it. And so began the fall, not of a city, but of awareness. The wisdom that had once aligned them with source became corrupted by ambition. The technologies that had once healed began to harm. The understanding of energy, no longer held in reverence, was used to manipulate, to dominate, to assert superiority over others. What had begun as divine collaboration turned into separation. Hierarchies formed. Secrets were kept. The vibration of the civilization began to drop. And as that vibration dropped, so did their memory of what they truly were. This was the true fall of Atlantis. Not the sinking of stone into sea, but the sinking of consciousness into fear. The divine memory once living in every heart was pushed aside for systems of control. Power overtook wisdom, and eventually the natural laws responded, not as punishment, but as consequence. When a civilization loses alignment with its soul, its structures cannot hold. Whether by flood or fire, by war or collapse, the outer reflects the inner. And what once stood as a beacon of balance crumbled under the weight of its own disconnection. But not all was lost. The wisdom, the real wisdom, was preserved, hidden, carried forward not in monuments or scrolls, but in the souls who had lived it. They reincarnated across generations, across continents, across lineages. They brought fragments of memory with them, fragments that would reappear as intuitive gifts, sudden knowing. Dreams that felt like echoes of another world. You might be one of them. If you've ever felt a strange familiarity with ancient symbols, an unexplainable pull to the metaphysical, a longing for a world that values soul over structure, it's not fantasy, it's memory. Modern humanity is the heir to Atlantis, not just its beauty but its mistakes, not just its knowledge but its consequences. We walk on the same earth, we hold the same power, we carry the same choice. Will we remember who we are? Or will we repeat the cycle of forgetting, of misusing what was given to us? You can see the parallels now. Advanced technology outpacing wisdom, science racing ahead of ethics, power concentrated in the hands of the few while the many live in disconnection. We have split mind from spirit. We've turned the earth into a resource instead of a living being. We've replaced inner knowing with external authority. And still, we hunger. Not for more information, but for meaning. That hunger is not new, it's ancient. It's the echo of Atlantis calling you to remember, not to rebuild what was, but to restore what was lost inside you. The knowledge wasn't destroyed. It's encoded in your very being, in your DNA, in your dreams, in your longing for something more than this world offers. It doesn't belong to any one religion, any one culture. It belongs to the soul, and as more of us awaken to this remembrance, something extraordinary begins to happen. We start to realign, to shed the distortions, to reclaim the balance between mind and heart, between power and purpose. We begin to live not as consumers of life, but as co-creators. We begin to heal the old Atlantean wound, the misuse of divine energy, and to forge a new path, one where the blueprint of the soul is no longer hidden beneath the rubble of forgotten temples, but lived in real time, in the choices we make, in the love we share, in the worlds we build. This is not a myth, it's a cycle, and you are part of it. The fall into matter did not end with Atlantis. It continued, deeper and deeper, until the memory of Source became a whisper. But that whisper is growing louder now. You can hear it, can't you? In the way the world is changing, in the questions rising inside of you, in the sense that something ancient is being reborn through you, not from books, not from gurus, but from within. You were there once, and now you are here, again, not to mourn what was lost, but to remember what's possible. Somewhere inside you, beneath all the noise, the rules, the names, and the obligations, there is a memory you didn't ask for, a knowing that didn't come from this life. It's quiet yet unshakable. You may not be able to put it into words, but you feel it in your chest like a presence that's always been there. It whispers in moments of silence, in the stillness before sleep, in the ache of dissatisfaction that no material success can ever fully cure. It's the soft echo of a truth that never left you. You came here for a reason. Not to chase achievements, not to climb a ladder someone else built, not to perform a role so convincingly that you forget you're acting. You came here to remember, not just who you are, but why you are. This is the forgotten purpose. The thread running through every lifetime, every struggle, every strange coincidence you couldn't explain. It's not a career path. It's not a mission statement. It's a vibration, a soul-level agreement, a quiet promise made long before your first breath that you would come here, take on the illusion of separation and, through choice, through experience, find your way back to truth. You weren't sent here as a punishment. You volunteered. You weren't born empty, waiting to be filled by doctrine or education. You came filled with memory, with intention, with light. And the world, well-meaning or not, began the process of helping you forget. It told you who you were supposed to be. It praised you for fitting in. It shamed you for standing out. It taught you to look outward for validation, authority, and identity, and slowly, layer by layer, the purpose began to dim, but it never disappeared. Because the soul cannot be erased, only buried. You see, your purpose is not something you find, it's something you uncover. It's not out there waiting, it's in here, remembering. And every challenge, every moment of pain or longing or even boredom has been nudging you back toward that remembrance. Nothing in your story has been random. Even the detours served a function. They showed you what wasn't real so you could recognize what is. They pushed you to the edge of forgetting so that when remembering finally arrived it would mean something. According to the ancient transmissions spoken in trance, not invented nor theorized but received, the soul's journey through time and body was always about evolution, not just in the physical sense, but in consciousness. The body changes, yes, societies evolve. But the deeper journey is internal. It's the growth of awareness, the unfolding of knowing, the gradual reclaiming of a truth that was never lost, just hidden under the rubble of culture and fear. And this journey hinges on one sacred element: free will. You are not a puppet. You are not a pre-programmed being acting out a divine script. You are a soul with choice. And that choice is everything. Because you could have stayed in the light. You could have remained in the higher realms, basking in unity and perfection. But you didn't. You came here, to density, to confusion, to duality. Not to be trapped, but to grow. To exercise free will in a realm where remembering isn't easy. That's what gives it value. That's what makes it powerful. You chose to forget, knowing you would eventually choose to remember. And that choice, to awaken, to return to your essence despite everything that tried to pull you away from it, is the most sacred act in the universe. It's why Earth is not just a planet. It's a training ground, a sacred theater where souls come to refine themselves through experience, not because they are impure, but because they are becoming. In this process, no one is judging you. There is no scorecard in the sky, no being keeping tally of your mistakes, only lessons, only opportunities, only invitations to peel back one more layer, to see yourself more clearly, to respond with more love, more truth, more alignment with the original vibration you were born from. That vibration still lives in you. It's what makes your heart race when you hear something that resonates. It's what causes tears to fall when you see someone remember who they are. It's what draws you to beauty, to meaning, to depth, even when the world calls those things impractical. It's the pull that refuses to let you settle for a life that looks good but feels empty. That's not dissatisfaction. That's the soul rising. That's your original purpose refusing to be silenced any longer, because even when you forget, the soul remembers. Even when you numb yourself, the soul remains awake, watching, waiting, whispering, not in judgment but in love. It knows why you came here. It knows how hard it is to remember in a world designed to keep you asleep. And it never loses faith in you, not once. Every lifetime, every incarnation, every attempt to wake up is honored, because each step is progress. Each moment of awareness is victory. And now you're in a time where the remembering is accelerating. More people are feeling it, the longing, the questioning, the cracks in the old story. You're not alone. The world is shifting. The old systems are trembling, not because they're being destroyed by force, but because people are choosing something different. Choosing presence over performance. Choosing love over fear. Choosing truth over comfort. Choosing to remember. And with every act of remembrance, the forgotten purpose begins to glow again, not as a task, but as a presence, a knowing, a peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a fire that doesn't burn but illuminates. It's subtle at first, then stronger, until one day you realize it's not something you turn on and off. It's who you've always been. Your purpose is not out there. It's not in the next job, the next success, the next relationship. It's here, in your breath, in your awareness, in your choice to live from the inside out, to walk as someone who knows not everything, but enough. Enough to stop pretending, enough to stop running, enough to look in the mirror and say, I remember now. You were never meant to live on autopilot. You were meant to awaken, to become a living embodiment of the truth you once knew, to live not in reaction, but in alignment, to create not from fear, but from remembering. And the moment you begin to reclaim that forgotten purpose, even in the smallest of ways, you start to shift the field around you. Others feel it. They don't need your words. They feel your energy. They remember something in themselves because of what's awakening in you. That is how it spreads, not through preaching, not through debate, but through presence. Through frequency, through one soul at a time remembering what the world tried so hard to make them forget. You came here for this, and you're not late. You're right on time. There is a voice that's been speaking to you your entire life, not in the way you might expect, not through thunder or miracles or booming declarations from the sky, but in moments, in whispers, in symbols, in the space between thoughts. It's the voice of something ancient and intelligent, something that was with you before you were born and will remain with you long after you leave this form. It's not trying to control you. It's not demanding your obedience. It simply wants you to remember that you've never been alone. Every soul has access to it, no matter your background, your past, your beliefs, or your doubts. This isn't about religion. It's not about joining something or subscribing to anything. It's about tuning in to what has always been here, the language of the divine. The problem isn't that the higher power has stopped speaking, it's that most people were never taught how to listen. From a very early age you were trained to trust only what you could measure, explain, and prove. You were conditioned to look outward for answers, to silence your inner voice in favor of authority. If it didn't come from a book, a teacher, or a system, it was dismissed as fantasy. So you began to doubt your instincts. You ignored the gut feelings, the dreams that lingered, the signs that felt too perfect to be coincidence. You chalked it all up to imagination. But imagination is the doorway, and intuition is not a guess, it's a compass. There's a reason you felt nudges, why certain people feel instantly familiar, why you've known things without knowing how, why some decisions felt heavy in your body while others made you feel light and clear. That's not random, that's guidance. According to the deeper readings channeled in trance states, not filtered by ego or intellect, but coming directly from the soul's connection to source. This form of communication has always existed. Long before language, long before ritual, there was a current of knowing flowing through every being. Dreams, hunches, a sudden insight in the middle of an ordinary day, a chance encounter that changes everything. These are not accidents, they are transmissions, invitations. Dreams especially are one of the purest channels. In the dream state, your conscious mind, the part of you that filters, doubts, and resists, is temporarily relaxed, and in that openness the soul can speak. Not always in literal terms, often through metaphor, symbol, and archetype. A house in your dream might be your sense of self. A stranger might be an unintegrated part of you. A recurring image might carry the vibration of something your soul is trying to reclaim. These messages aren't random. They're encoded, crafted not to scare or confuse you, but to stir something awake. You've had them, haven't you? Those dreams that feel too vivid to dismiss. The ones that stay with you for days, that carry a mood, a color, a knowing you can't explain. Sometimes they come with clarity. Other times they feel like riddles. But always, they carry meaning. Your higher self, your guides, the source itself. This is how they reach you when words won't suffice. Then there's intuition, that subtle inner pull that doesn't shout but speaks with certainty. You might feel it as a tightness in your stomach, a sudden stillness, a magnetic draw toward a choice that makes no logical sense but feels completely right. That's not irrational, that's resonance. The soul recognizes what the mind has yet to understand, and when you begin to honor that voice, life changes. Not because it becomes easier, but because it becomes aligned. Synchronicity is another thread in this divine web. You think of someone and they call. You stumble on a book that answers a question you didn't know how to ask. You keep seeing the same number, the same phrase, the same symbol, over and over again. The world becomes a mirror, reflecting back to you the messages you're ready to receive. Not because reality is trying to trick you, but because it's alive, conscious, responsive to your energy, your focus, your willingness to see beyond the veil. These synchronicities aren't proof of magic. They're proof that life is not random, that consciousness is not isolated in your head, that the higher power doesn't sit in some distant realm, watching from afar. It's here, now, all around you, moving through you, waiting to be noticed. But guidance is never forced. That's the beauty and the challenge of free will. You won't be dragged toward awakening. You'll be invited, over and over in infinite ways, through joy, through heartbreak, through silence. Every experience, every challenge Every longing you feel is an opening, a crack where the light gets in. You're not being tested, you're being spoken to. And the question is not whether the messages are coming. The question is, will you listen? Reconnecting to this stream of guidance doesn't require a ceremony. It requires presence, attunement, trust. You begin by noticing, paying attention to what lights you up, what drains you, what keeps showing up in your field. You learn to get quiet, not to escape the world, but to hear the world more clearly. You stop dismissing the things that don't fit the mold. You start asking different questions, not what should I do, but what am I being shown? This is what spiritual awakening truly is. Not an escape from reality, but a deeper immersion into it, with new eyes, with a remembrance that nothing is neutral and everything is connected. You begin to feel that life is not happening to you, but through you. You begin to co-create, not just react. You begin to walk with an inner knowing that cannot be explained, only lived. And the more you honor that knowing, the more the guidance flows. Because the higher power doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be present. It needs your willingness, your curiosity, your courage to trust something that can't be proven but is felt with every fiber of your being. There is no final destination in this, no ultimate achievement. Just deeper connection, deeper awareness, deeper love. The voice of the divine doesn't shout because it doesn't need to. It speaks in the language of resonance, of rhythm, of remembrance. And you're already listening more than you think. The fact that you're here, reading these words, seeking this connection, it means the stream is already open. You've already said yes. And now it's simply a matter of returning, again and again, to that inner space where the messages are always waiting, where truth doesn't argue, it simply is. You were never meant to walk this life alone. You were never meant to figure it all out with your mind. The guidance is here. It always has been, and it's speaking to you now. He didn't come to start a religion. He didn't come to demand worship or divide humanity into chosen and damned. He didn't even come to save you in the way you've been taught. His presence on earth wasn't a cosmic rescue mission. It was a living reminder, a mirror held up to your own forgotten brilliance. He came not as a gatekeeper but as a guide, not to be placed on a pedestal but to show you what's possible when a human being fully remembers their origin. The figure known to the world as Jesus was more than a man, more than a story frozen in time. He was the embodiment of a pattern, a vibration that exists outside of chronology, outside of doctrine. What Casey called the Christ pattern wasn't a title unique to one being. It was, and is, a frequency. A blueprint of spiritual maturity that lives within every soul, waiting to be awakened. What made him extraordinary was not that he was unlike you, but that he remembered who he was completely, and lived from that place without distortion. This reframes everything. Because if Christ was not the exception but the example, then his story isn't a conclusion, it's a beginning. If his life was not about your unworthiness but your potential, then salvation isn't something that happens to you, it's something that happens through you. The return to God is not a rescue, it's a reunion, a homecoming, and not in some distant future but here, now, in the heart of your own remembering. Casey spoke of Jesus not just as a savior but as the full expression of what the soul can become. He described him as the one who had evolved through many lifetimes, each one refining, deepening, preparing him to carry the Christ vibration in its purest form. He wasn't born to suffer. He was born to embody, to hold the remembrance of divine origin in every cell of his being, and to walk among us as a living frequency, not to demand allegiance, but to resonate so clearly that others would feel something awaken in themselves just by being near him. This is why people wept in his presence, not because he cast a spell, but because his energy dissolved the veil. In him they saw who they really were, even if only for a moment, even if they couldn't understand it. He was the mirror, not the destination. And that mirror still exists, not in stained glass or sacred texts, but in your own soul. The Christ pattern is not about religion. It's not bound to one language, one culture, or one set of rules. It's an energetic template, a frequency of unity, compassion, power, and clarity that exists within you. It is the part of you that loves without condition, that sees through illusion, that forgives even when the world tells you not to, that knows your divinity not as a theory but as a lived truth. You don't earn this pattern, you remember it. You don't activate it by following steps. You awaken it by letting go of everything that isn't you, the programming, the shame, the story that says you're separate from God, that you're here to be punished or tested or fixed, that you are unworthy of love until someone else deems you enough. These are illusions, and Christ came to dissolve them, not just for one people but for everyone. When he said the kingdom of heaven is within you, he wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. He was speaking to a truth that exists beyond dogma. He was saying, stop looking outside. Stop waiting for a gatekeeper. You are not a servant trying to please a king. You are a spark of the source itself, learning how to walk through time while holding the memory of eternity. And the doorway back to that memory is inside you. Salvation, then, is not about escaping judgment. It's about shedding illusion. It's not a transaction. It's a transformation. Not a reward for obedience, but a return to alignment. A return to the original design, the same one the Christ embodied. A design that says, you are divine. You are powerful. You are here not to be ruled, but to co-create. This is where the controversy begins. Because if every soul carries the Christ potential, then no system can claim exclusive access to truth. No institution can monopolize divinity. No leader can stand between you and God. And that is threatening to those who build their power on dependency, on guilt, on fear. The moment you realize you are capable of the same awakening, the same depth of love, the same inner authority that Jesus displayed, the old hierarchies begin to collapse. That's why this teaching was buried, not because it was false, but because it was dangerous, to systems, not to souls. But it never disappeared. It lived on in mystics, in healers, in artists and rebels and everyday people who felt the hum of something more within them. And now it's rising again, not as dogma, but as energy, a global awakening to the truth that what was embodied once can be embodied again, and not just by saints and sages, but by you. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers. You only need to begin living from the place inside you that knows, that remembers the compassion in his eyes, the truth in his silence, the power in his surrender. You are not here to worship a man. You are here to become a vessel for the same light he carried, and that light doesn't belong to him. It flows through all of creation. To walk the Christ path is to return moment by moment to that light. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet choices, in the forgiveness you extend when it's hardest, in the love you give without needing return, in the way you show up to your own healing, not to be fixed, but to reclaim, in the courage to see through fear, to speak truth, to walk with integrity when no one's watching. That is the path, not a title, not a robe, but a frequency. And every time you align with it, the soul rejoices. Because this is the journey. This is the reason you came. Not to escape earth, but to bring heaven here. To bridge the gap between the divine and the human. To become the kind of presence that reminds others, without saying a word, that they too are sacred. That they too belong. The return of the soul is not a single event. It is a daily remembering, a peeling away of what you are not, a falling into what you've always been. And the Christ pattern is not just a guide, it is your nature. It is the divine in form, and it's calling you now, not to follow blindly, but to awaken boldly. For centuries, science and spirituality have been treated as enemies, two languages describing two completely separate realities, one rooted in the material, the other in the invisible, one praised for its precision, the other dismissed as belief. But what if the division was never real? What if the boundary between the seen and the unseen, the measurable and the mysterious, has always been an illusion, a line drawn not by truth but by fear? Modern science, as you've been taught it, insists that only what can be observed, tested and repeated is real. It demands evidence that can be held under a microscope or weighed on a scale. It exalts the brain but questions the mind. It studies the body but ignores the soul. And yet, in the most advanced corners of physics, in the quiet breakthroughs of consciousness research, something remarkable is happening. Science is beginning to whisper what mystics have shouted for millennia, that reality is not made of matter, it is made of awareness. The soul has never been a theory. It's not a poetic idea or a religious artifact. It's the engine of your existence, the animating force that precedes the body and survives it. Edgar Cayce never spoke of it in vague terms. To him the soul was the core essence of the self, eternal and evolving. Not a ghost within the machine, but the architect behind the entire structure. He described the soul as multidimensional, participating in this physical world while remaining tethered to realms beyond time. And long before mainstream science even dared to explore the idea, Cayce was already suggesting what quantum mechanics would eventually begin to confirm. Consciousness shapes reality. Quantum physics shattered the myth of the solid world. The deeper scientists peer into the fabric of matter, the more it begins to dissolve. At the subatomic level, particles are not stable building blocks but flickers of potential, waves of possibility that don't even take on form until observed. Let that sink in. Nothing exists in a fixed state until consciousness interacts with it. The observer doesn't just witness reality, they collapse it into being. This is not spiritual speculation, it's scientific fact. And yet this truth remains deeply inconvenient. Because if reality is shaped by awareness, then consciousness isn't a byproduct of the brain, it's the source. And if consciousness is the source, then everything we've been taught about materialism, determinism, and the limits of the human being must be rewritten. This is the suppressed science of the soul, not because it's unfounded, but because it threatens the very foundation of a world built on control. You see, when people believe they are only bodies, they behave like consumers. They chase pleasure, avoid pain, and live in fear of death. They become predictable, controllable, profitable. But when people awaken to the reality that they are souls, eternal, powerful, creators of their own experience, they become impossible to manipulate. They begin to live with purpose, not from survival but from truth. Gauss's reading spoke to this long before the words quantum entanglement or non-local consciousness were ever uttered. He described the soul as existing across dimensions, influencing reality beyond the constraints of time. He explained that thought is not just internal, it is vibrational, that intention can affect matter, that healing can occur at the energetic level, sometimes faster than physical cause and effect would allow. These ideas were considered radical, even dangerous, but now they are being echoed by the most courageous scientists, those willing to question the very nature of existence. Studies in consciousness research have shown startling anomalies. Patients recalling memories from surgeries during which they were clinically dead. Children speaking languages they've never learned. Individuals accessing information in altered states that they could not have possibly known. Remote viewing, energy healing, synchronicity, the placebo effect itself, a phenomenon where belief literally transforms biology, is nothing less than proof that the mind and body are not separate. But why does mainstream science still resist? Because to admit the existence of the soul is to admit that life is more than what can be controlled. It's to acknowledge that intuition is real, that dreams are not illusions, that your inner world matters just as much, if not more, than what you can touch. It would mean that every human being carries within them a universe of meaning that no machine can quantify, that no machine cannot be owned, that wisdom cannot be sold, that the sacred is not confined to churches or laboratories. It lives in you. The convergence between mysticism and quantum theory isn't coming, it's already here. Both describe a reality in which separation is an illusion, where time is flexible, where intention shapes outcome, where everything is connected, not just through space, but through consciousness. The ancient sages spoke of this. So did Casey. So do quantum physicists like David Bohm and Amit Goswami. They're all pointing to the same truth, using different words. The soul is not metaphor. It's the field, the space between, the intelligence behind the veil. And you don't need a PhD to feel it. You've already experienced it in the uncanny timing of events, in the way your body reacts before your mind catches up, in the tears that come from a truth you didn't know you needed. You've felt it in meditation, in nature, in silence, when something inside you expands, and for a brief moment you remember that you are more than this form, that you are held, that you are infinite. The suppression of this truth hasn't just come from academia, it's come from everywhere, from systems that benefit when you believe you are small, from paradigms that profit when you think you're broken, from ideologies that convince you the sacred can only be accessed through them. But the soul doesn't need permission to speak, and the science that dares to listen, truly listen, can no longer deny what it finds. You are not a machine, you are not an accident, you are not the product of random chemistry. You are the conscious witness of your own evolution, playing in the illusion of time, discovering the divine in the disguise of form. And every time you pause, every time you trust your intuition, every time you choose love over fear, you reconnect to the field that moves through all things. You don't need to abandon science to embrace the soul. You need only remember that the most powerful truths cannot always be measured, they must be felt. And in feeling them, you awaken a kind of intelligence that no microscope will ever find, but which has been guiding you from the beginning. The soul is not a theory, it is you. It's not just a coincidence that you're constantly distracted. It's not accidental that you feel scattered, pulled in 100 directions, unable to find a moment of peace. The world you live in, its pace, its noise, its demands, was not designed to nourish your soul. It was engineered to fracture your focus, hijack your attention, and keep you from remembering what you really are. Because if you remembered, truly remembered, everything would change. The greatest war today isn't being fought with weapons. It's being fought with information, with images, with endless streams of noise. Your attention is the most valuable resource on the planet, not because it fills bank accounts, but because it's the gateway to your power. Where your attention goes, your energy flows. And if that energy is constantly being siphoned off into fear, comparison, consumerism, or outrage, you don't have enough left to hear the quiet truth of your own soul. They know this. The systems that govern much of modern life, economic, technological, cultural, are built around the premise that you must never fully awaken, that you must always feel a little unworthy, a little behind, a little anxious, a little afraid. Not enough to break, just enough to stay distracted, just enough to keep you chasing. Because a distracted soul doesn't question. It doesn't remember. It obeys. From the moment you wake up, your senses are assaulted. Notifications, alerts, headlines soaked in fear, advertisements tailored to your insecurities, social media platforms engineered to manipulate dopamine and create the illusion of connection while actually deepening disconnection. None of this is neutral. It's not just how things are, it's strategic. A civilization built on spiritual forgetfulness requires constant input to sustain itself, because if you ever stopped, really stopped, you'd hear something else. Something ancient, something real. You'd feel the pull of your own divine memory, and nothing would ever be the same. Materialism is its own kind of spell. You've been taught to measure your worth by what you own, what you produce, how you appear. You're told that fulfillment comes from the outside in: a better job, a newer car, more likes, more status, more distraction dressed up as success. But the more you chase, the emptier you become. And in that emptiness you're sold more things to fill the void. A void that nothing external can ever satisfy. Because the ache you feel isn't for things, it's for truth, for meaning, for remembrance. And that's what makes this a spiritual war. Not in the dramatic sense, not angels versus demons, but in the subtle, constant battle for your awareness. Every time you choose stillness over scrolling, you disrupt the system. Every time you listen to your intuition instead of the algorithm, you take your power back. Every time you step outside the endless loop of comparison and say, "I am already enough," you weaken the foundation of the illusion. That's what scares them. That's why they keep turning up the volume. Because the quieter you become, the more you hear. You weren't made to consume, you were made to create. But creativity requires space. Soul requires silence. And the current design of modern life leaves no room for either. You're constantly reacting, constantly stimulated, never quite settled. And when you do find a moment to rest, the mind is still spinning, addicted to movement, allergic to stillness. That's not your fault. It's the residue of conditioning. But you can unlearn it. You must unlearn it, because every time you pull your energy back from the matrix of distraction, you reclaim a piece of your soul. Fear is their favorite tool. Fear keeps you obedient. It keeps you in survival mode. And when you're in survival, you don't question, you don't dream, you don't remember, you just react. Fear culture is the perfect mechanism for spiritual amnesia. Constant threat, economic, environmental, political, makes you believe the world is unsafe and that you are small, powerless, and dependent on external forces for your security. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. Your safety was never out there. It was always in here, in your alignment, in your awareness, in your capacity to remember that no matter what the world says, you are not the chaos. You are the presence watching it. And when you remember that, you become free. Not free from challenges, but free from manipulation. You stop being a pawn. You stop being easily swayed by trends or fear or mass opinion. You become anchored in something deeper. And that's dangerous to the systems, not to you. Because you stop needing what they sell. You stop obeying what they preach. You stop feeding the machine. And the machine can't run without your energy. This is why awakening is an act of rebellion, not against people, not against society, but against the hypnosis of forgetfulness. When you remember who you are, you don't become violent. You become luminous. You begin to radiate a frequency that others feel. You become the permission for others to do the same. That's the true revolution, not overthrowing governments, but dismantling the inner structures of fear and programming that have kept humanity asleep. And it all begins with attention. Not in the shallow sense, but in the sacred sense. Where you place your awareness is where your life unfolds, and in every moment you have a choice, to give your attention to chaos or to clarity, to illusion or to truth, to fear or to love. You are not a passive observer in this war. You are the battlefield. And the more you reclaim your attention, the more you reclaim your soul. So pause, breathe, turn inward, feel that still, small presence behind your thoughts. That's you, the real you, the one that cannot be bought, branded, or broken, the one that remembers, the one that never left. That's your power. That's the signal they've tried so hard to jam. And now that you've found it, protect it, guard it like the treasure it is, because in a world designed to make you forget, remembrance is the most radical thing you can do. You are not a product, you are not a profile, you are not your follow account, your title, or your possessions. You are awareness, you are energy, you are divine memory wrapped in skin, and the war ends the moment you choose to come home. There's a reason you've always sensed that your thoughts mattered more than people said they did. a reason why your emotions carry weight, why your inner world seems to echo into your outer one. That reason isn't wishful thinking, it's truth. You weren't placed here to obey, to struggle, or to suffer at the hands of an indifferent universe. You were designed to create, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual consolation prize, but as a literal architect of reality itself. This is what they never told you, that you are not merely living in a world, you are actively shaping it, that every belief you hold, every word you speak, every intention you energize is not disappearing into silence, it is being received, translated, mirrored back to you through people, circumstances, and synchronicities. You are not at the mercy of fate. You are the projector behind the screen. Edgar Cayce did not shy away from this truth. In his readings, he didn't describe a world in which you are separate from creation, begging for favor from a distant deity. He described something far more powerful, a cosmos that responds directly to you, a universe that is interactive, not random, a reality where your consciousness is not just observing, but participating in every unfolding moment. This idea that you are a co-creator with the divine is not new, it's ancient, but it has been buried beneath centuries of fear-based theology and mechanistic science. You've been taught to see yourself as powerless, as a soul tossed into the currents of karma or circumstance. But you were never meant to be a passenger. You are the one steering the ship, whether consciously or unconsciously. The laws that govern this are not mystical abstractions, they are energetic truths. Your thoughts emit frequency, your emotions radiate waves, and the field around you, the unseen intelligence that weaves through every particle, is constantly adjusting to meet your vibration. It doesn't judge, it doesn't punish, it simply reflects. This is not reward or punishment, it's resonance. You've seen it, haven't you? The way your inner state shapes the world around you. How days soaked in gratitude seem to unfold with ease. How fear breeds more fear. How moments of true alignment magnetize clarity, people, and purpose in ways logic can't explain. That's not coincidence, that's creation. But here's the key, you're always creating, whether you realize it or not. The mind left on autopilot doesn't stop shaping reality, it simply shapes it through fear, doubt, and inherited beliefs. And then you look around at a life that feels misaligned and assume that's just how it is. But what if it's not? What if it's a canvas, painted by unconscious brushstrokes? What if reclaiming your power is not about learning something new, but remembering how to paint on purpose? This is the shift. The moment you stop seeing life as something happening to you and start seeing it as something happening through you, you stop blaming and you start choosing. You stop waiting and you start becoming, not by force, but by frequency, by tuning your inner state to the reality you want to experience. And this doesn't mean denying pain or pretending everything is perfect. It means owning your role in the story, seeing every experience as a mirror, asking not, why is this happening to me, but what am I being shown? This is how you reclaim authorship of your life, not by controlling every event, but by aligning your vibration with the truth of who you are. Cayce's message wasn't about magical thinking. It wasn't about bypassing or fantasizing your way into happiness. It was about spiritual responsibility. He spoke of how your soul chose this life, not as a punishment, but as a playground for remembering. That within you lives the same creative force that shaped the stars, and that force is not abstract, it is you when you are awake. So the question is not whether you have power, it's whether you're using it consciously. Because when you align with the creative energy of Source, everything begins to shift. You stop reacting and you start radiating. You stop asking for permission and you begin living from a place of deep knowing. This is not arrogance. It's clarity. Clarity that you were born with an inner compass, and that the more you follow it, the more reality rearranges to support your path. You've been conditioned to believe that creation is something that happens out there by leaders, governments, experts. But real creation starts in the unseen, in thought, in vibration, in belief. What you accept as real becomes your reality. What you energize with emotion becomes your experience. What you visualize consistently with faith begins to take form, not because you're forcing it, but because you're finally in alignment with it. This is how you return to Source, not by escaping the world, but by remembering your role in it. You are not here to passively worship creation. You are here to extend it, to embody it, to make the invisible visible through your choices, your presence, your frequency. That is the divine plan, not obedience, but co-creation. And that's what makes you dangerous to every system built on conformity and control. Because the moment you realize your thoughts have power, you stop feeding the thoughts that keep you small. The moment you feel your emotions shaping reality, you begin healing the wounds that distort your signal. The moment you own your ability to co-create, you stop outsourcing your authority, and suddenly the matrix starts to crack. Because a sovereign creator cannot be manipulated. You were never meant to live by default. You were meant to live by design. Not someone else's design, your soul's design. And that design is always trying to reach you, through intuition, through synchronicity, through desire. Not the shallow kind, but the deep pull toward expansion, toward truth, toward the life that feels like home. And the more you follow it, the more life meets you there. Not because it suddenly likes you, but because you've finally tuned into what was always available. Creation is not about force. It's about flow. It's about alignment. You don't have to control the entire process. You only have to hold the vibration of what you wish to live. Feel it, see it, become the version of you who has already received it. And reality, like a mirror, will begin to reflect what you are being. This is the art. This is the power. This is what they never wanted you to know. That you are not a product of your environment, you are the environment. That you are not just navigating reality, you are shaping it. And the more you return to that knowing, the more you return to Source, not by climbing a ladder, but by remembering you are never separate. You are the spark and the fire, the drop and the ocean, the question and the answer. You are the creator, waking up inside the creation.